CNN Tonight, I'm Don Lemon. It has been an extraordinary day to be an American, to sit back and watch true patriotism unfold. Real patriotism, not the symbols of patriotism that some have been using to divide us, like whether someone stands or kneels at a ball game. I'm talking about real patriotism, the real patriots to whom we owe an incalculable debt of gratitude. And that's our Gold Star families, whose loved ones made the ultimate sacrifice. General John Kelly is one of them. His 29-year-old son was killed fighting for our country in 2010 in Helmand Province in Afghanistan.
Understand, there's tens of thousands of American kids, mostly, doing the nation's bidding all around the world. They don't have to be in uniform. You know, when I was a kid, every man in my life was a veteran. World War II, Korea, and there was the draft. These young people today, they don't do it for any other reason than their selfless sense of selfless devotion to this great nation.
Absolutely, and you could hear a pin drop in that room when he said that. And who could or would argue with the Gold Star family about that loss and that devotion? So how did we get here? That's also important. Why did the President's Chief of Staff even have to stand at that podium today? Where did all these claims of politicizing this controversy come from? The entire thing started with the man Kelly works for, and that's Donald Trump, the Commander-in-Chief. But that was never mentioned during the press conference today. General Kelly attacked Florida Congresswoman Frederica Wilson for listening to the phone call to the widow, and then for later answering a reporter's question about that phone call. Never mind that he and other members of the Trump administration listened in on the call on the president's end. Never mind that it was a reporter's question that elicited President Trump's initial brag about calling Gold Star families in the first place. But in this White House, you must always counterpunch, always be on the attack. So?
And a congresswoman stood up, and in the long tradition of empty barrels making the most noise, stood up there and all of that, and talked about how she was instrumental in getting the funding for that building, and how she took care of her constituents because she got the money, and she just called up President Obama, and on that phone call, he gave the money, the $20 million to build the building. And she sat down, and we were stunned. Stunned that she'd done it. Even for someone that is that empty a barrel, we were stunned.
Empty barrel. In that same press conference, Kelly lamented that he felt women were no longer held as sacred in our society. Perhaps he should look across the Resolute desk at his boss, grab him by the P word, blood coming out of her wherever, Rosie O'Donnell is a fat pig, Miss Venezuela is Miss Piggy, Miss Housekeeping. I could go on, but I don't have all night and I have to get to the show. What I'm trying to convey is that this isn't about Kelly, but about his boss, who didn't have to send Kelly out there to defend his bad behavior. One of 3 generals he sent out today to clean up his mess and vouch for his behavior in the wake of Niger. Kelly, Mattis, McMaster. All Trump had to say was, "I'm sorry," full stop. And if he needed to go on, if he needed to say something else, he could have said that was not my intention, and I am deeply sorry. He could have called her again personally, the widow. He could have called the congresswoman to explain himself. He could have put class above one-upsmanship. He could have put patriotism above personal grievance. But outside the briefing room, we all got another lesson in patriotism today, and I think I know who the subject was intended to be here. A lesson from 2 men who were once on opposite sides of a lot of issues, 2 former presidents speaking out for this country's real values.
We've seen our discourse degraded by casual cruelty. At times it can seem like the forces pulling us apart are stronger than the forces binding us together. Argument turns too easily into animosity. Disagreement escalates into dehumanization. We've seen nationalism distorted into nativism. We've forgotten the dynamism that immigration has always brought to America.
The goodness and decency and hard work and responsibility and sacrifice that's on display by the American people every single day in their communities all across this great country, all across this great state, people of every walk of life. It doesn't matter whether they're white or black or Hispanic or Asian or Native American, whether they're disabled, whether they are gay or straight. There are people all across this country that want to do things better, that want to work together.
In America, many people claim the mantle of patriotism, but some are willing to die for it to protect us. And some speak out to protect it and to protect us from degradation of our values. Now let's begin our program. I want to bring in now CNN's Chris Cillizza, our politics editor at large, Jim Sciutto, CNN's chief national security correspondent, April Ryan, CNN political analyst. Good evening to all of you. As I started, I said, what a day to be an American, to witness all of this in just one afternoon. April, I'm going to start with you because you were in the room for this. General Kelly expressed disgust that Congresswoman Frederica Wilson listened in on the condolence call from the president, and then he talked about the media.
It stuns me that a member of Congress would have listened in on that conversation. Absolutely stuns me. And I thought at least that was sacred.
So she talked to the media about it, I should say. What is your take on the general being stunned that it became political, April?
Well, first, I wasn't in the room. I was in Little Rock, Arkansas, but I watched from my hotel room in real time. And as you know, Don, I have been in conversation with Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who said the reason why she heard it is because the Master Sergeant had the call on speakerphone for all in that car to hear, to include family members of the late Sergeant LaDavid Johnson, his widow, the Congresswoman herself, her staffer, as well as the Master Sergeant. And she was in there as well as other people who listened to it. And she even said that she heard what the president had to say and she wanted to say something, but the Master Sergeant said no. She was very upset with his words. When General Kelly made that statement, he did not deny those were the words that the president used. So we do know that the president did use those words. Now the questions are what happened. Frederica Wilson has given her take on what she's heard from intelligence officials on Capitol Hill as to what has happened. So the question is that accurate as well? Would the White House say that's accurate too?
But if you listen to General Kelly's words, he basically confirmed what the Congresswoman said, right? Because he said that the Congresswoman lied about the phone call, and he tweeted, Democratic Congressman totally fabricated that. I said what I said to the wife of a soldier who died in action, and I have proof. Sad. Didn't General Kelly contradict that tweet?
He did.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, sorry, April. Yeah, he did. I think what you saw General Kelly doing was sort of a very powerful way of political cleanup, which was to say, here's what Donald Trump said, which was what Congresswoman Frederica Wilson said he said, but here's what he meant.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's where you, and here's the origin of what he said, which is General Dunford, who's the Commandant of the Marine Corps, also Kelly said his best friend, had told him something similar when he lost his son. So he was trying to sort of show us the genesis of that phrase. He knew what he was getting into.
But Jim, here's the thing
to
with
explain it.
I understand that, and listen, I understand. Listen, I have the utmost respect for General Kelly, but General Dunford was saying to General Kelly, who is a military man to a military man about a military man, and that is a different context in telling a 24-year-old civilian woman who is with child and one of them standing by her side or about to stand by her side at a casket. The context is important, and that is important. And sometimes people just don't know what they don't know, and I understand if a military man said that, I'm sure someone would understand it. But when you're speaking to a civilian, I don't think that that's the right way to hear that. I don't think that she wanted to hear that in that moment, Jim.
Well, listen, can any of us imagine a more difficult conversation to have?
Not at all.
We can't. So to find the right words, it's virtually impossible to get it right. Now, So set that aside for a moment, because I can't imagine having to make that call. I watched General Kelly today, Gold Star father himself. I've got 2 sons. The idea of losing a child is just the most heartbreaking thing to imagine. The idea of speaking to someone who lost a child, not quite as heartbreaking, but God knows difficult. So I would set that aside for a moment, in the moment, how difficult that call is. The trouble is that call was burst out into public, right? First by the president to some degree, because the president brought it up, right, in defense of himself, because he was asked by our colleague Sarah Murray, and this is how it started, why some 2 weeks after the attack the president hadn't said anything about these soldiers. That's where this started, and then the president got into it, and then we had a bunch of back and forth over that. So the president put it out into the public. The Congresswoman did as well, but let's be honest, she was there in the car with them. Presumably, it looks like by the family's choice, our understanding is that she knew the fallen soldier and the family before. So it's not like she was an eavesdropper, right? She was not
she's an interloper, and
exactly.
He was part of her mentoring program. For all intents and
Exactly.
purposes, she's part of the family. And listen, Jim, I understand.
You know where I'm getting at. I mean, the point being that it's a difficult conversation under any circumstances. It burst out into the public.
Difficult.
It burst out in the public, and it became, and the president has as part of this. It became a political football, right? A battling point.
Well, that's the point is, it's a difficult conversation, and if you say something, and if it offends someone, you say, I am sorry. That was not my intention. In that moment, I'm not sure what I could have said or what I should even say to you in this moment. I can't imagine what you're going through. He could have done that personally instead of putting it back. But he is the commander-in-chief. Listen, take that the Congresswoman, that she put it out there as well, and that she has some degree of responsibility. Whatever you feel about that, she is not the commander-in-chief. She is not the President of the United States. She does not have to be the consoler-in-chief. And so the President of the United States should always take the high road. And if he did not intend to say it, if that wasn't his intention, tell that to the widow. Don't make up for some mistake that you've made by bringing everybody else into it.
And don't tweet, by the way. Don't tweet something about fabrication.
And,
I mean,
don't send out General Kelly, who's lost his son, sadly, in Afghanistan in 2010. Don't send him out there to clean up your mess. Take responsibility. And we would not be talking about it. It would be over.
That's the nub of it, Don. I think that's the central pivot point, which is, I think you could explain this as Donald Trump, as Jim mentioned, was trying to do something that is extremely difficult and something he doesn't do and had never done before. He hasn't done it a lot in his life. It's not something he's done. He's a businessman. He's never done this. You are dealing with a widow who is struggling with grief. You can understand the possibility that miscommunication, what he said and what she heard, what he meant and what she took it to be, weren't right. Fine. The problem is the constant doubling down, the attacking, the saying that this Congresswoman, whether it's General Kelly and the empty barrel stuff, which I thought felt totally out of place,
They're trying to
was
discredit
otherwise
her.
a very
They're
powerful
trying to discredit her for telling the truth.
Right. Or just the whole idea like it's fabricated. Just say, you know what? I can never understand this sort of grief. I did the best that I could. I wanted to call. If what I said wasn't how it was received, I deeply regret that. There's no harm done there, and we're not talking
in this story,
about
and we would not be talking about it, and the story would be over. But stick around. I've got you guys are going to come back. Stick around with me, everyone. When we come back, there are even more contradictions in General Kelly's defense of the president today. We're going to cover as many as we can. April, you were saying?
I was saying, this is about discrediting a congresswoman who told the truth. There were several pieces of that statement today from General Kelly that really stood out to me. One, the fact that he said that he had to go to Arlington National Cemetery and walk around for an hour and a half. That really hit me hard because his son is there. His son, he is a member of the Gold Star families now, unfortunately. But we thank him for his service and his son as well. But at the same time, this congresswoman who told the truth, who she was not an interloper, she did not do this secretly, she was in the car when the master sergeant played it. But here's another piece that I think that the White House is upset about why they're trying to discredit her. Because she has information that they don't necessarily want out right now. She's getting information, intel, that they have not put out. And this Boko Haram issue is real. I called a retired general who has vast knowledge as it relates to that part of the world and the U.S. efforts with Niger. This general, this retired general said to me, he said, look, this is not a unique effort. We have trained before, as well as advised the Niger military when it comes to Boko Haram. Boko Haram and ISIS are linked. So she is giving information that they don't want out. They want to control the narrative, and they're trying to discredit her. This is what I don't understand.
Don, April makes a great point there, because beyond the issue of the call, right, there are 4 dead American troops here. Right. On an operation where the intel told them it was unlikely they would make enemy contact, when in fact they had 50 ISIS-linked militants attack them, right. Where regardless of whether the Pentagon is, and they are, uncomfortable with the phrase left behind, they want to say separated from his unit, regardless, for 48 hours, they didn't know where he was. They found his dead body 48 hours later. Why is that? Why did those planes, the evacuation planes, take off without him? Secretary Mattis said, don't blame the troops on the ground. I have no intention of doing that, but it's reasonable to ask the Pentagon questions as to why that happened. Why was there no U.S. air cover? A French plane came 30 minutes into that firefight with no ability to fire on the ground. It flew over to disperse the troops, scare them away. Couldn't fire. Then it was a French aircraft that evacuated them, and a private contractor that took out the dead body. There were no U.S. military aircraft that could get there in time. Why? Those are very reasonable questions to be asking 15 days after this happened. Uncomfortable questions for the Pentagon and for the commander-in-chief. They're not answering them.
Do you think, Chris, that may be part of the reason that there was such a slow response, that they didn't want to touch it? That
I mean, look, I'll add to what Jim said, and the simple answer, Don, is I don't know why the response took as long as it did, and obviously when you take the time that you took, and then you have this he said, she said, back and forth with the president saying a congresswoman lied, it wound up not being true, all of that is not, if you're going to wait a while, you want it to be seamless when you decide to say what you say. I'll add, though, to Jim's point, and look, John McCain is out there saying there's more to this story, and I'm willing to subpoena people to find out what it is. You know, you say what you want about John McCain. He's a Republican. He's a conservative Republican from Arizona who's in the same party as the president. I mean, this is not, Chuck Schumer trying to score, do a political. This is a belief that there is more there, and you heard it doesn't get as much attention because of all the other things General Kelly said, but he did acknowledge that they're trying to figure out what exactly happened.
Yeah. Listen, not to cut you guys off, but I want to get this in because this is important. This just came out tonight. Congresswoman Wilson's office just released a statement, and then it says, the Congresswoman has decided to not make any further comment on this issue. The focus needs to be on helping a grieving widow and family heal and should not be on her or Donald Trump. She has nothing else to add but stands by the statement issued last night. In addition, it is imperative that an investigation be conducted to help us understand the circumstances that led to the ambush that caused the deaths of Sergeant Johnson and his fellow soldiers. She's been calling for that all along, and Jim, as he just said, I think that is what John McCain and many others want as well.
Yep.
Well, that's not an empty barrel, right? I mean, that's a congresswoman with constituents that includes someone who was killed in this action, asking a very reasonable question: why did he die? And why did his fellow soldiers die? And we don't have those answers yet. And the families have a right to know, but the public has a right to know.
Yeah. April, it's not the last we heard of. You think they'll address it in the briefing?
I'm sure they will. But the question is also, there's another question. Was the soldier left behind, and was there a transmitting device that the Congresswoman said was on the soldier that was emitting signals when he was found? So there's so many questions about intelligence, about the vehicles were not armored, about weaponry, about firepower. There are a lot of questions that remain unanswered. The nation wants to know. Soldiers' lives were lost, and that is indeed the focus. And if you can find answers, you could prevent possibly another type of situation like this down the road.
And she did yesterday called it, she said that this was this administration's or Donald Trump's Benghazi.
Benghazi.
So we'll see. Thank you all. I appreciate it.